Have a great show.
Hey, Nicole, it's always so good to see you, and thanks. And welcome to The Beat. I'm Katie Fang, in for Ari Melber. Today, leaders who succeeded in beating back some of Donald Trump's most controversial first-term plans are warning that round two is now here. As Trump takes his first post-election steps on immigration, elevating hardliners while plotting raids, camps, and mass deportations. Today, NBC News learning that Stephen Miller, the architect of the notorious family separation policy, is expected to be named Trump's deputy chief of staff for policy. Trump also tapping as border czar Tom Homan, who has touted workplace raids and mass deportations. Both officials known for echoing Trump's language demonizing immigrants while implementing his plans.
On day one, my administration will terminate every open border policy of the Biden administration. We will begin the largest domestic deportation operation in American history.
I will run the biggest deportation operation this country's ever seen.
America is for Americans and Americans only.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. Getting them out will be a bloody story. If you come back, you will be executed. You will be killed immediately. Not going to be easy, but we'll do it.
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
So this is now more than just rhetoric. As the Washington Post reports, Trump's win puts militarized mass deportations on the agenda. The Wall Street Journal noting Trump advisors are now drawing up plans for the deportation push, including weighing a national emergency declaration that would allow Trump to repurpose military assets to detain and remove migrants. Several Democratic governors saying that they're going to fight Trump on an array of his draconian policies, including immigration. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey becoming the first to explicitly state her state will not cooperate with mass deportations. And immigration lawyers are getting ready for battle. That includes the ACLU, which scored wins against Trump over family separations and his travel ban. The group now sending an open letter to Trump, vowing to defend people's rights in the courts, at state legislatures, and in the streets. There's a lot happening today, including renewed threats from Trump to abolish the Department of Education. Trump picking MAGA ally Lee Zeldin to run the EPA. And Trump naming GOP Congresswoman Elise Stefanik to be the United States ambassador to the United Nations. But we're going to start tonight with the fast-developing fight over immigration. Joining me now is Cecilia Wong, ACLU National Legal Director, and Fernanda Mondi, political strategist and an MSNBC political analyst. My thanks to both of you. Cecilia, Trump is getting the gang back together. You got Tom Homan and Stephen Miller. They are the epitome of that idea that the cruelty is the point. Your thoughts on how bad it's going to be?
So, Katie, absolutely. With the appointment of Tom Homan and Stephen Miller, Trump is starting to launch his attacks not just on immigrants in the United States and people who are at the border seeking a fair chance to apply for asylum. Trump is really announcing that he's going to be attacking American communities around the country. Miller and Homan are both right-wing extremists. It's clear that with their announcement, these are the architects of family separation. These are the architects of the Muslim ban. These are not policies that the majority of Americans want. This is not about having a fair and secure processing of people at the border. This is really, as you heard from Trump himself, an attack on the interior of the United States. When they say they're going to launch the largest domestic deportation force in history, we have seen this before, not just with the first Trump administration, but when local sheriffs like Joe Arpaio, former sheriff in Maricopa County, Arizona, or police forces and sheriff's departments around the country decided they wanted to go after immigrants in U.S. communities. You see door-to-door raids with U.S. citizen children and spouses in mixed status families also taking the brunt. We fought this before and we'll fight it again. Donald Trump has announced with these two appointments, he's going to go door to door. He's going to go into our workplaces as Americans, and he's going to launch an attack. Well, we're ready to meet him wherever he goes.
You know, Fernand, I have a lot of respect for Cecilia. I think, Cecilia, you are one of the most brilliant people that I know, but I'm going to respectfully disagree because you said this is not what a majority of Americans want. But Fernand, a majority of Americans voted this in. When we played that sound leading up to this segment, right, that wasn't me saying it. That was Donald Trump and Tom Homan. That was Stephen Miller. Those are their own words. So, again, rendered speechless, this is exactly what a majority of Americans are asking for.
It is indeed, Katie, and this is why so many of us were so concerned. We're sounding the alarm, really, since the moment it became clear that Donald Trump was going to seek the Republican nomination again and inevitably became the nominee of that party, because we are now going to be living a living nightmare here in this country. And let's not pretend or not sometimes speak the reality of the horror happening before our eyes. The immigrants are the first step. The idea here is to go after this group, the most vulnerable, to create this militarized force that will now have access to every sector of the United States. And they'll start with deporting undocumented immigrants without any concerns of what that means for the economy or the local communities or the fear and even the violence and death that is going to come and result from that. But it's also a pretext through which to have this effect that you will not be out of line. Anything you do that is against the wills of this Trump state will have these kind of punitive damages. You heard Trump himself in that clip you played said, "We will kill you if you come back. We will execute you, and we won't think twice about it." Right now, it has also set off a tremendous sense of anxiety across the country. I think you're going to be seeing over these next 2 months, before Donald Trump is sworn in as the next president, a movement all across the country. Many immigrants are going to try first to go to the sanctuary states, sanctuary areas, to try and seek some sort of respite, which will cause an issue of its own in those areas. So it's a dark time. There's no sugarcoating this. I think, as Cecilia says, we have to be vigilant. We have to come together as Americans and do what we can. But this is, sadly, the consequence of an election that had the worst and most dire consequences.
Cecilia, my hat off to you and the ACLU. You guys are always on the front lines fighting these battles in the place where I, as a former trial lawyer, believe is where you can have victories against anti-democratic principles. What is the ACLU going to be able to do to fight back against the Tom Homans and the Stephen Millers?
I think three things, Katie. And the reason I say that the majority of Americans don't want these policies is that I think you're absolutely right, that there is a core group of supporters for Donald Trump, for Stephen Miller, for Tom Homan that want these extreme policies. These are white nationalists. These are extremists. I don't think the majority of American people want that. And I think people are going to realize that when Trump talks about zero tolerance, he's going into American communities. We're going to see door-to-door raids in apartment buildings in our cities and towns across America. We're going to see our workplaces disrupted with ICE agents, possibly the military, the National Guard. Trump said he's going to call out spare no expense, right? When we're already spending $19 billion a year alone on Customs and Border Protection, not to mention ICE. So we're going to meet him in three ways. Number one, we will take him to court again as a lawyer speaking to a lawyer. I think you know the ways in which we challenged the Fourth Amendment violations. We're going to see racial profiling. We've got lawyers in all 50 states, and we will be joining forces with other civil rights organizations and with governors and mayors who are in American communities and want to stand with us against this right-wing extremism. Number two, you've already heard Governor Maura Healey of Massachusetts, Governor Gavin Newsom of California. You're going to see again, just as we saw during the first Trump administration, governors and mayors around the country who are going to say, we are not going to stand for this federal government attack on our communities. And we're already working with those state and local officials to build a firewall around communities, not just immigrants, but dissidents, protesters, people who Trump has already announced he's going to go after. And third, I genuinely think, you may disagree, but I genuinely think that when the majority of Americans see what they have voted for, when they might have said, look, we don't like the way border policy is going, they're going to see that what Trump and Stephen Miller and Tom Homan have in mind is not what they had in mind. And I think you're going to see hundreds of thousands of Americans taking to the streets in protest, just as you saw when Donald Trump was in office the first time around.
I mean, Fernand, there is political capital and there's human capital, right? I mean, Cecilia talks about the value in being able to go and protest this, and yet we do know that there was political backlash the first time around when Stephen Miller did his draconian immigration policies. But, I mean, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer, and I'm definitely, if anybody knows me, I'm definitely not a pessimist, but Americans being alarmed and appalled by what they see, none of this was a secret, though. All of this was laid out clearly on the table as being the promise, the delivered promise that we're already seeing. I mean, there's no slack here, right, Fernand? We have Trump already naming people into these positions. You got Tom Homan saying, we're just going to deport them all together. I mean, we're going to take even the children, right, of undocumented immigrants, the children being born here. They are U.S. citizens. And yet Homan's like, we're just going to put them all together and just ship them out.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I like you, Katie, I don't want to be a doomsayer. I'm not here to make people scared. But unfortunately, it's Donald Trump and the MAGA message, which leads me to this position. I certainly hope Cecilia is right. I hope that the American people are able to exercise their First Amendment protected constitutional rights to peacefully protest. It's just that this time around, unlike in the first term, none of those guardrails that were there are going to exist. When there were protests in the first term, it was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs who said to the president, you cannot use the military, Mr. President, to intimidate or stop the free exercise of speech. This time around, I fully expect them to implement either the Insurrection Act or martial law or something that will try and stifle immediately those types of mass protests. So it's a credit to the work that our lawyers and groups like the ACLU are going to do. But this is why the stakes were so high. It wasn't a joke when we called Donald Trump a fascist. It wasn't a cool campaign talking point. We weren't just saying democracy was on the line in this election. Those were the facts. The American people have chosen, I think, unfortunately, but now we are at the mercy of what the Trump administration and those serving in the administration do. They still have to take oaths to the Constitution, all of them, to preserve, protect, and defend it, and the rule of law that comes with that. I just don't have any confidence, Katie, that they will.
Well, I have confidence in the Cecilia Wongs of the world, and so that's why the ACLU and other fantastic organizations need the support to be able to make sure that they are able to fight on the front lines. Cecilia Wong and Fernand Amandi, I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you for getting us started tonight.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
Coming up, how Democrats plan to fight back against Trump's plans for retribution against his political enemies. And I'm going to talk live to the head of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund about...
I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
As a candidate, Donald Trump promised retribution. And now that he is the president-elect, it's becoming all too real. Steve Bannon openly declaring who their targets are.
Biden's getting swept out. Kamala Harris is getting swept out. MSNBC is getting swept out. The Justice Department's getting swept out. The FBI is getting swept out. You people suck, okay? And now you're going to pay the price for trying to destroy this country.
And it does not stop there. MAGA lawyer Mike Davis, who's been advising Trump for years, had this warning for New York Attorney General Letitia James and Special Counsel Jack Smith.
I dare you to try to continue your lawfare against President Trump in his second term, because listen here, sweetheart, we're not messing around this time, and we will put your fat in prison for conspiracy against rights.
Where does Jack Smith go after all of this?
He should go to prison.
Politico reporting that DOJ officials are, quote, terrified. Another MAGA lawyer, Mark Paoletta, who is a part of Trump's transition team, warning DOJ lawyers to get on board or get out. This is very alarming, but not to some Republicans on Capitol Hill. Take a listen to GOP Senator John Barrasso.
Do you think it's important to preserve the independence that's traditionally existent between the White House and the Justice Department, Senator?
I think what John Kennedy appointed his little brother Bobby as Attorney General. The president gets to choose who he wants. We'll have hearings on whoever the president points.
The short answer appears to be GOP leaders think that Trump should do whatever he wants with the Justice Department. DOJ veteran Harry Litman and Molly.
The institutions and taking power. You're not going to get your judges through. They're all going to be Trump judges. We got to purge the corruption. We got to purge the rot. Maybe we got to get rid of the FBI and build another federal police force. Maybe we got to deconstruct a bunch of the CIA.
Joining me now is Harry Litman, former U.S. attorney and legal affairs columnist for the LA Times, and Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair. Harry, that guy went to prison, right? Steve Bannon. How can those who still believe in the independence of the Department of Justice protect the rule of law from this second Trump administration?
It is awfully hard, Katie. They're coming at it like a freight train and proposing a whole theory of power that everything originates from Donald Trump. This may sound bureaucratic. It is absolutely fundamental to what we think of as our justice system. And this is what happens when democracies slide toward autocracy. He has a theory now that his closest advisors are propounding. I don't see the Supreme Court pulling the rug out from under it. That just says he will meddle in whatever case he wants to. He will make it the DOJ, as he always wanted it to be, his own law firm. It's absolutely toxic to the rule of law. It's toxic to defendants. It's toxic to people's confidence in the DOJ. And there's no obvious way out given their aggressiveness in framing this for day one and the obvious flunkies that he intends to install in the higher positions of the Department of Justice.
So, Molly, let's remind people of the chronology of the relevant issues here. That Supreme Court immunity decision came out before the November election, right? And Project 2025, the consolidation of executive power, that's been around for a long time. And the idea of, co-opting a DOJ, which is supposed to be independent of the president, and making it, as Harry so aptly says, the, personal law firm of the president. We saw him do that in the first term, and he promised it leading up until November. So many of us sounded the alarm when Trump was just a candidate for office, that this kind of abuse of power would happen if he won. But like I just said, with Cecilia and Fernand, Molly, the American voters voted for him anyway.
Yeah, so what I would say is it is this suspension of disbelief that voters have around Trump, which is, and we saw a ton of reporting which explained this. You have voters who say, yes, he says he's going to do that, but he's not really going to do that. He brags about it, but he's not really going to do it. So a lot of these voters, and you see this in like you had all these Latino voters vote for him, but they were like, he's not going to deport me. He's not going to deport my family. He's not going to deport the undocumented relative I have in my family. And so, look, that suspension of disbelief, I think, is how we got here. And, I think that he will be able to do some of these things.
So, Harry, what's the legal recourse for people or companies if they end up within the crosshairs of Trump and the DOJ and, as you call them, the flunkies that are going to do his bidding?
Yeah. Look, there are a lot of legal remedies. You can bring something against the government for a politically trumped up prosecution, but there's not going to be any kind of personal remedy, as you were very right to couple everything that he's doing now with the immunity decision. He did it himself when he said he would fire Jack Smith within 2 seconds. And as a general matter, we rely on the professionalism and fairness of the DOJ, and there just are not a lot of remedies out there, not to mention Don Bannon's crowing about having the federal judiciary populated with Trump judges. This is really serious stuff, and it is a fundamental erosion if it takes place. And I think, Katie, it's going to take place, at least in some part, with an absolute bedrock assumption about the criminal justice system since at least Watergate. We are really going back to a government of man, not of laws.
Molly, the MAGA plans for revenge and retribution, they go beyond just the federal levers of power with the DOJ. They actually go to local law enforcement officers like Attorney General Tish James, but she spoke out about this last week. Take a quick listen.
My office has been preparing for several months because we've been here before. We faced this challenge before, and we use the rule of law to fight back. And we are prepared to fight back once again.
And the question, Molly, is how effective do you think this kind of fighting back is going to be in swaying public opinion against Trump and his supporters?
So I would say I think it's a very good sign that you already see governors stepping up, right? We're seeing in California the governors saying, Governor Newsom saying, I'm going to protect my people. And look, they have rights, right? We saw during the Biden administration that the Texas governor created his own little fiefdom in a way. So states do have real rights. And we're seeing that in New York State. We're seeing that in Massachusetts. That is very comforting to me because governors do have a lot of power depending on the state. And so that I think is good. Look, this is just going to be kind of one thing at a time here. And I think people are really worried. And I think they need to know that as much as we're all concerned about the state of American democracy, there are still many levers of power. And on the state level, there can provide some protection for people. And I think that's important to know. So, yes, it's definitely a little bit scary right now. But I do think there are some checks and balances still left. And look, number one is that if Trump starts doing this stuff and it's wildly unpopular, which I think it will be, what we've seen in his 2016 administration was that if people push back, he stopped doing it. Well, yes, to some extent,
kind of,
but a little bit. I mean, there's
second point, Katie.
Go ahead,
Harry. A little bit. James won a jury verdict here. The grand jury twice. There already were checks and balances. The notion that somehow it's all trumped up in her own volition is just false.
Right, well, 100%. Those were grand juries that indicted him, by the way. It wasn't like random Democrats running around doing it.
And a jury that convicted him in the civil case, or that found liability in the civil case with Tish James.
Yeah. So, Harry, we are seeing already some troubling signs around this Trump transition. This is from the New York Times, and I quote, Trump has not yet submitted a legally required ethics pledge that states that he will avoid conflicts of interest and other ethical concerns while in office, raising concerns that his refusal to do so will hamper the smooth transition to power. Harry, Trump couldn't walk a foot in that first term without tripping over an ethics violation. Who's going to be there now to serve as the guardrails on enforcement here?
I'm going with nobody. Look, there were some 3,000 ethical violations last time. And understand, this is something he had to do back in October, and Biden and Harris did it. He cannot get his security clearance in federal law, but all indications, it's really reminiscent of tax. And how he completely just faked everyone and put it off and never released his taxes. All indications are he's going to fake his way through, and then come January 20th, he can say, I don't care, I want all the national security stuff anyway. There's no reason for him to have delayed since October unless he planned to basically ignore the ethical constraints that are part of federal law. Those aren't even norms. He's going to ignore those laws, it certainly seems.
It's like the worst kind of deja vu. Harry Litman and Molly Jong-Fast, thank you to both of you. That's been front and center. Reproductive rights. Voters in 7 states voting to expand abortion rights. While ballot measures may have failed in South Dakota and Florida, it is worth noting that in my state, Florida, 57% of Floridians voted in favor of enshrining abortion rights, just short of the 60% supermajority that was needed in order for it to become law. But with Trump heading back to the White House, there are rising fears that new federal restrictions will wipe out any gains that have been made at the state level. Critics pointing to the blueprint laid out in Project 2025, noting that former and future Trump officials have spent years plotting to impose sweeping restrictions through executive action. Trump's victory now clears the way for Trump's nightmare to become a reality. Any federal restrictions would supersede state protections, and an outright nationwide ban, is still possible. Adding to the confusion is Trump's very scattered and inconsistent stance on the issue.
I'm very pro-choice. I am pro-choice in every respect.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion?
There has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form. I was able to terminate Roe v. Wade. I was so honored to have done it. I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time.
You'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks.
He's since backpedaled on that remark, saying he'll vote no on Amendment 4, the amendment set to protect abortion.
The uncertainty fueling a spike in abortion pill sales, a surge even larger than the day after Roe v. Wade fell for one company. As abortion rights advocates warn what lies ahead could make a crisis that is already potentially deadly to millions of women much, much worse. Joining me now is Alexis McGill-Johnson, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Action Fund, and Skye Perryman, President and CEO of Democracy Forward. My thanks to both of you always when you guys lend your time and insight. Skye, I'd love to start with you. Now, how would Trump be able to enact national restrictions without getting people in Congresses getting their fingerprints on these restrictions?
Well, Project 2025, which of course he disavowed during the campaign, but now it's going to be up to the American people to hold him to account to that. But Project 2025 outlined a range of executive actions that the president purports to be able to take without the approval of Congress, everything from seeking to undermine the authority of the Food and Drug Administration and their scientific judgments with respect to mifepristone access, to seeking to change positions at the Department of Justice and misinterpreting our laws, to enforce 1800 era laws like the Comstock Act. And so it really remains to be seen what they will do. And it's going to be incumbent upon the American people to hold him to account as he tried to run away from this extremism on the campaign trail.
Alexis, both Project 2025, as Skye notes, and the Republican platform outline very serious abortion restrictions, like banning abortion drugs and criminalizing travel in order to obtain the procedure. Are there any legal plans that are already in place in order to stop or delay these draconian moves?
Look, I think our job, Katie, is to make sure that we hold him to account to exactly what he said, right? We watched him flip-flop, as you just showed in the last clip, being pro-choice when he started out many years ago running for president, to supporting all of the anti-abortion amendments, all the way up into including installing 3 Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe v. Wade and deliver the Dobbs decision, to now holding on to the number of tragedies that we have seen over the last 2 years of patients who have had to travel miles and miles outside of their states in order to get access to care, to the patients who have literally been forced into pregnancy or forced into literally losing their lives and their families. Women are dying because of Trump's abortion bans. So we know what he is pretended based on what he's already said. And I think our job is to hold